Rita McGrath, thank you so much for joining this International Women's Rights Day at UNESCO. So could you please first introduce yourself and tell us why this day is so important for you?
So my name is Rita McGrath. I'm a professor at the Columbia Business School. And International Women's Rights Day is important symbolically to draw attention to the fact that in so much of the world, women are still treated as second-class citizens, not given the opportunity to really live free and independent lives, deprived of education. And I think it's important to talk about those issues.
So, as a professor and also as a writer, you received many honors. How do you promote women's rights in the way you're teaching and the topics you're choosing?
Well, for quite some time, I was the founding faculty director and main faculty member in our Women in Leadership course at Columbia Business School. So I include that in my teaching. I also really try to draw attention to the importance of diversity in the work that I do in innovation, because we know diverse teams are more innovative, diverse teams are better creative problem solvers, diverse teams are less likely to make mistakes because someone's not being represented. And there's also research that shows that teams that include more women actually have higher collective intelligence. So there are a lot of reasons why it's important to keep that mix of people on the agenda.
As a woman, did you feel along your career you had to fight, you had to go through difficulties? What type of challenge you felt as a woman?
I probably never really thought about it that way. What I would say looking back is that the men who were sort of roughly in the same track as I did seemed to have a much easier time. It seemed to go faster. And I would also say that I think and this has actually been researched, when women co-author with men, they tend not to get very much credit for that work. The men tend to get the lion's share of that credit. And I did notice that when I started writing on my own and started just doing things by myself, that I was getting a lot more attention than when I co-authored with my male colleague, which really upset him. It wasn't his intention at all.
Very interesting. Another question is, how did you find the strength to answer maybe some comments while you were a woman in this very business male world?
To answer comments? I think you just have to be confident in your mastery of whatever the topic is, and not pay too much attention. There are always going to be people who, for one reason or another, believe you don't belong in the room, and if you belong in the room, then you have every right to be there.
Yes, so no imposter syndrome is what you're saying.
Well, I think you have to overcome it. I think all of us have it at certain times. So, there are many occasions when I've walked in a room and sort of thought, "Oh, this is important or interesting." But I think you have to remember that if you've been invited, you have every reason to be there. And I think it's also important, and this is for people who host events and wish to create more egalitarian representation in their events. It's very important to emphasize why that person is here when you introduce them. That's a lesson that I have tried to pass on to a lot of my colleagues, which is mind your introductions.
Do you think women have a role to play in peace education?
In peace education? Oh, of course. Historically, it's been women that bear the brunt of discord and violence. It's been women that really have tried to hold communities together. It's been women who have, in the case of countries like Rwanda, right, brought it back from terrible, horrible genocidal situations and actually turned it into a functioning society. So I think women have an enormous role to play.
To finish this very short and too short interview, could you give us some advice, for young generation watching us, both to women, to maybe follow your path as a role model, but also to young male in order to be fighting side by side for a moment in order for them to get what the Dr. Mukwege is talking about, positive masculinity?
Yes, yes, that's a wonderful word. Well, I think for the young men, I'll start there. Recognize that in many situations you've been given an advantage. You didn't ask for it; it's not your fault, so don't feel guilty about it. But if you can use those positions of some privilege to draw attention to a woman, to reinforce in a meeting her point of view, to be an ally, that would be very, very helpful. And we know it'll make your performance of your team and probably help your whole situation to get better. As for the young women, a couple of thoughts. Firstly, don't undermine yourself unintentionally. You're as smart and as good and as clever as anybody else who's in your sort of peer group. And so, don't destroy your own self-confidence. I think that's one. Don't be afraid to advocate for yourself. There's absolutely nothing wrong with taking politely, the claim for an accomplishment, for promoting what you do. Don't just expect your work to speak for itself. You need to draw attention to it in a civilized way, of course. And don't think that just working hard is going to get you noticed. You really need to do a bit more than that. The last thing I would really recommend is build your network. Build your network as early as you can, and as much as you can. That's been shown to really be important for later career success. And one last thing about networks is there's always two kinds. There's loose ties, entrepreneurial networks that are very far spread, and those are very good for finding opportunity. And then you have your dense friend networks that are excellent for getting work done. So think about networking on both of those dimensions.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rita, for being there with us. And thank you for your precious advice.
Thank you.